Live.
Hi everyone.
Welcome everybody to another LinkedIn Live here on my LinkedIn profile. Thank you for joining. I'm back here with Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. We're fresh off the Silicon Slopes Summit from last week. It's good to see you virtually, Kelly, but I really enjoyed actually getting to see you in person.
I know, it was so much fun.
It was good. It was good. So anyway, today we'll just jump right in here. So anybody who's seen these before, I'm going to have to put myself on mute and go and find the feed and make sure that I can keep on top of your comments and questions. But this is an Ask Me Anything format with me and Kelly. It's basically an opportunity to have to ask two experienced recruiters what they think about a number of different topics. The topic today is one that we are not taking lightly. We're going to talk about mental health today, and this is Mental Health Awareness Month. As Kelly pointed out, this has become a big issue in everyone's lives, of course, but particularly in the workforce, obviously, right? So we want to talk about mental health as it relates to the workplace and kind of how to talk about it. And, just again, questions that you have for us as it relates to the recruiting and frankly, HR function around mental health. We'd love to address them. That being said, we'll start off. Like I said, I've got to jump in, make sure I get to the comments, get to your questions. So I'll put myself on mute. Kelly, if you want to lead with a less serious topic here to begin with.
Right. Okay. So let's see okay. So this card says, if you had to choose one scent to be carried lightly on the wind every time the wind blew, what scent would it be? So, right? I think I'm hungry because I'm like churros. That's what I want. I want churros.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean I would be pretty pleased with that, frankly. I think that's that sounds good to me, no doubt.
Right. Or men's cologne. There's some good men cologne out there that I'm like, yeah, I would smell that all the time.
Oh boy. I don't, that's impossible to answer. I'll tell you right now, I would get sick of anything. That's my answer. It doesn't matter what it is or how, nice it smelled. I would be like, I'm so sick and tired of churros or lavender or, whatever
mint.
other, what's that?
And mint.
Mint. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's that's a funny one. But I can't answer it. I have no answer. I'm gonna double down on your answer for churros, except for I think I'd be eating a lot more if that were the case.
Right. Same.
Oh, well, good deal. Well, it's good to lighten things up again. For those of you just joining, welcome to LinkedIn Live. Again, you're here on my LinkedIn feed. Thanks for joining. Today, I've got Kelly Sanchez, my biweekly conversation partner, head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. And we're talking about a serious topic today. We're talking about mental health and particularly, mental health in the workplace. So please feel free to drop your questions in the comment section. I'll be monitoring those while trying to have the conversation. Not the best multitasker, but I try. And yeah, I think, just to start off, again, we're going to talk about this as it relates to the workplace, but I think, we'll address the elephant here. The reason we're talking about this, not that it's not always a serious topic, but so many more people have been dealing with mental health issues, if you will, because of the pandemic that we are still, suffering through. So I think in terms of where to start, Kelly, the first thing to say is, like, you're not alone. Anybody who's watching and who's thinking about this or feeling some of the effects, we're kind of all going through it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all go through different phases of it, different levels of it. Um, and just being able to go to someone and speak to them, if it's a friend, a leader, a peer. Um, Again, Scotty, you mentioned it's not an easy topic to talk about. However, I feel like the pandemic has brought it up to light. And I've seen a lot of an awareness around it, a lot of different topics and things that I think is good. And so I'm hopeful that now this is something that we can just talk about and make it common and just like everyday things. Um, but from a workplace perspective, yeah, mental health is definitely something that needs to be on employers' mind because it causes stress. There's depression, productivity. There's so many things that when your mental health isn't great, that affects work, but also you as a person. Um, so
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, the thing about the term mental health is it encompasses so much,
yeah.
right? I mean, when you talk about mental health, you could be referring to anxiety and depression. You can be referring to disorders. There's a number of different things that kind of come into this. I think generally speaking, what we'll discuss is kind of the fact that like everyone's mental health probably more related to anxiety and what generally leads to depression if you don't address it. Because again, we're all still going through this pandemic, still trying to figure out this, quote unquote, new normal. And there's obviously just a ton. I mean, I personally think that this is something that will be with us for a generation, right? This COVID's not going anywhere, and this collective trauma that we've gone through is not going anywhere. So I think, in terms of where to go next in the conversation, I'd like to start with just, maybe we can each share experiences, our experiences and some of the things we've done to try to address our own mental health throughout this last roughly 2 years, right? 18 months or so. What are your thoughts on that, Kelly? I mean, in terms of your own mental health, are you willing to be vulnerable and share a little with us? And then number one, and then number two, kind of how you've addressed some of those challenges you might have faced.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely vulnerable because as a leader, you want to be strong for your team, you know? But I think being real with them and letting them know and being constantly communicating, like, hey, today I'm off, or I'm not feeling it today, and being able to take the day, especially in the recruiting world right now, we have a lot of pressure of hiring. So for me personally, I've been able to be that example and be able to take time for me, which means, hey, I'm going to take the day off. That means I may just sit there and just watch Netflix all day, may go get a pedicure, but whatever that action or whatever it is that makes me feel more me and bring me into my space. So then the next day I'm better. Absolutely. That's what I've done. And in the mornings as well, um, I definitely will have like a cup of tea just to relax and make sure that I'm preparing myself for the day as well. And that's something that I do.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate to your point, one, the fact that you do express vulnerability to your team and make sure that they know that it's okay to talk about this. I think that's part of the reason why we're talking about it in our live today. If you're just joining us, by the way, Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. Thanks for joining me. We're talking about mental health in the workplace and how to talk about it. And I think it starts with just that, with talking about it, right? So to your point, for me personally, definitely a bunch of anxiety, right? Anxiety that, I mean, I tend to be a little anxious anyhow. We're talking about anxiety on another level. And again, I'm sure there's plenty of people that can relate to that, right? So long story short, I had a tremendous amount of anxiety early on in lockdowns, and there's kind of in my mind like a general low level anxiety that's still sticking with me, just because there's a lot that, again, that we're still trying to process, and also that we're still dealing with in real time today. So that's kind of how things have manifest for me in terms of my mental health. With regard to how I've addressed it and tried to, I don't want to say fix, that's not the right way to put it, but just try to manage it, I guess, is the best way to put it. I've, first and foremost, I think having conversations with other people. Obviously, you and I are doing this right now very publicly, but being willing to share how I'm feeling with my leader, and frankly, hearing that they've had similar feelings was super helpful. A lot of the stuff I'll say next is nothing new, right? It's all things that people that are far more qualified than me to speak about this would tell someone that's suffering through some mental health issues. But for me, what was really important was moving my body, right? Getting out, trying to exercise, and everybody does that in a different way, obviously. The other thing is sleep, right? I think it was hard to sleep for me at first, and so figuring out like a strategy that my wife and I started to use, that we're still actually doing, is like a mindfulness meditation, 10-minute mindfulness meditation before bed, which the mindfulness meditation guys like, don't do this in bed because you'll fall asleep. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point for me. So those are just two little tips for things that I did to kind of address this. But yeah, that's I guess again, my story about it, as well as like the things that I did to address some of the anxiety that I was feeling. Really quick, Kelly, I just want to, for those that have joined while we're in the middle of this conversation, just say thank you for joining. We are talking about mental health in the workplace. We've started up to this point just sharing our own experiences around some of the mental health challenges we faced in the last 18-ish months. And I think we should pivot into the workplace here, but just want to invite anyone watching to feel free to ask a question or put a comment in the comment section. I recognize that given the topic, takes some courage and no worries at all if you'd rather reach out to us directly, but feel free. Anyway, moving to the next part of this conversation, Kelly, did you have something before we jump in?
Okay. Nope.
So I think you're better suited, quite frankly, given the time you've spent in corporate talent acquisition. I've spent some time there as well, but you're better suited to lead here with regard to this next question. And that is, when it comes to mental health in the workplace, how do you recommend people talk about it, think about it? Dare I ask, does it belong in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. My opinion is that it does. You have to take care of your people. It's kind of one-on-one. You have to understand their mental state, how they're doing as a person, because they're not just an employee, really. But I've seen a lot of companies, because of COVID, like you shared, it was a struggle to go from in-person to shifting to virtually 100%, thinking we were only going to be there 2 weeks, maybe a month, to now 2 years. So absolutely, it's been long, and it's, again, it shifts, it changes. Like I mentioned, it's a phase. You go through phases. I think for me, it hit me later on. I was excited about working remote. But then afterwards, I'm like, I missed the connection with people. However, companies started to recognize like we need to do something for our employees. So they've offered, like, there's a lot of companies that are offering like a week off for your mental health. Go spend time with your family. Go do what you need to do for you. Work will be here when you get back, but disconnect. There's like you mentioned, meditation apps. Headspace is a good one. There's also like counseling as well that is provided through your employer. So there's a lot of different things that companies are now providing for their employees, which I think is great.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I will say, to your point that there are plenty of companies out there that are all over this, right? They're forward thinking, they're progressive, and they're addressing this proactively, which is fantastic. I'm gonna put you on the spot just a little bit here, and feel free to, if you don't know necessarily the answer to this, I can give my best shot at it too. But what about for those folks that don't have a company, or a leader like yourself who's going to be proactive, going to ask the question, and going to, have resources in place to address this? Those obviously those places exist. What do you recommend for somebody who's going through some mental health challenges, but don't necessarily feel like they're getting the resources around that from their employer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say talk to like a close friend, see what resources they can provide. Um, or maybe even Google too. I haven't been much on there, but I know it's a great resource. Um, and family as well, lean on them. I know again, it's hard to tell them about what you're going through, but they love you, they want to help you. So being able to go to them first and see, maybe you guys can partner together in figuring out what you need. That's what I would say. If there isn't an employer standpoint to support, maybe someone within your own little network to be there with you by your side.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. And I just take an opportunity here to shout out DigiCert, which is, obviously your employer and a company that is proactive when it comes to mental health and a number of other things too. They're hiring, by the way, anyone who's watching this.
Yes, I like that plug. Thanks.
You got it. So no, I mean, to your point, I think realistically, like, not every company provides it. This is what I would say, if you're going through a real struggle. And I know that the most difficult thing if you're going through a struggle is wanting to do this, but if there is anybody out there watching this that needs to hear this right now, it's, you are not alone. There are absolutely people who care about you. And if you are employed, one of those people is very likely, and I hope this is the case, it's your leader. So, you can have that conversation, and you should make sure that they know what you're going through, because it's not uncommon, especially right now. Number one. Number two, I mean, obviously, professional help, right? There's, again, traditionally employers haven't been the place to go for mental health resources. So, again, a lot of what we're saying today is nothing that people haven't heard, but I do think that those are kind of for anybody who's watching today, that the key takeaways would be: make sure that make sure you can have a conversation with your leader, and you should. Just make sure that they know kind of where you are, and then seek the help you need, right? To address it. If it's something that some of the tips that we provided earlier in the conversation are not going to address, because certainly that's, the case for a lot of people, right? And it's also the case for people at different times in their lives. So I think, just again, for anybody joining the conversation, if you do have questions, Kelly and I have talked about mental health in the workplace today. We've shared our own experiences. We've talked about some of the things you can do, some of the resources that are typically available to you. And again, recognize that it's not easy to ask a question publicly here on LinkedIn, but if you have one you'd like to ask to experienced recruiting professionals for our take on this topic, feel free to put your question into the comment section. Kelly, any last word on this topic?
Gosh, now that you're talking about the recruiting aspect, just shout out to all the recruiters out there. Seriously, since pandemic, it's been a challenge. Seriously. So I would just like to shout all of you guys for being badasses and just keep on grinding, doing the work, because It's a role that sometimes you don't get a lot of thanks until you hire that individual. But there's so much work that goes on the back end of it, though. And so, shout out to you guys, especially.
Yeah, I mean, we're biased, right? But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we talked about this in a past episode. You know, technical positions probably are the top need, if you will, right now throughout the country, and particularly where we are here in Utah. But recruiting is like a close second. And what that means is that everybody who is recruiting right now is trying to do more with less. We know what that feels like. We're there with you. And so I think that's great. I would echo that. But again, just for those of you that might be watching that aren't recruiters, I mean, jobs are hard. Life is hard, right? Like, again, none of what we're saying today is groundbreaking or shattering stuff. These are, in some ways, it may feel like a trope to say it, but I think oftentimes I just like to know that I'm not alone when it comes to some of these things, and that other people are feeling the same way. And again, if this conversation today can do anything, hopefully it'll at least do that.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining. We had a short one today. It was obviously a pretty heavy, if you will, topic. It's one that we want to, what are the kids saying these days? Normalize.
Well, it's important too, because
Yeah,
what you're saying, we all go through it.
Yeah, it's super important. It's something that we both are passionate should be talked about more in the workplace. It doesn't have to be talked about openly like we are, but we're happy to do that. And again, it should be talked about regularly, especially among the closest people in your workplace, right? So generally your boss. But yeah, thanks again for joining, Kelly, as always, head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. I really appreciate you coming on. Everybody who's watching, thank you so much for hanging in there with us today. And just know that we do this every other Wednesday. So we'll be off next week, but the following Wednesday, we'll be back where we go live around 11:30 Mountain Time. Looking forward to seeing you all. And if you have topics you want us to cover, feel free to send them to us in direct messages or texts or calls or whatever. So
Awesome.
all right, Kelly.
See you
Thanks
later.
again.